What did Earth look like through the eyes of ancient humans? Imagine for a moment that you are standing on a hill in East Africa, not a few thousand years ago, but nearly 100,000 years in the past. You are human. Not almost human, not half-formed, not some primitive creature crawling toward intelligence. You are anatomically modern. Your eyes see the world almost exactly the way ours do. Your brain is capable of fear, memory, curiosity, planning, wonder, and imagination. You can look across a valley and feel something. You can notice the shape of clouds. You can recognize danger in the silence of grass. But the Earth in front of you is not the Earth we know today. The sky is familiar. The sun still rises, the moon still changes shape, the stars still return night after night. But below that sky, the world is almost unrecognizable. The coastlines are not where we think they should be. The forests reach into places that are now dry. Deserts become grasslands. Rivers flow where only sand remains today. Animals larger and stranger than anything alive now move across the land. An entire country's worth of habitable ground exist in places that are now buried under the sea. To ancient humans, Earth was not a fixed map. It was a living, changing world. And if we want to understand what our ancestors experienced, we have to stop imagining the past as just a rougher version of the present. It was not simply today's Earth with fewer buildings. It was a different planet wearing the same sky. The first major difference was water. Today we think of the oceans as permanent. We draw coastlines on maps as if they are natural borders that have always existed. Britain is an island, the Persian Gulf is water, Southeast Asia is an archipelago, Australia and New Guinea are separate. But for most of human prehistory, coastlines were not stable. They moved. During colder periods, huge amounts of ocean water became trapped inside glaciers and ice sheets. As more water froze on land, sea levels fell, and when the world warmed again, that frozen water returned to the oceans, slowly flooding the land. At the height of the last ice age, around 20,000 years ago, global sea level was roughly 120 meters lower than it is today. That number does not sound emotional until you imagine what it actually means. A lower sea level does not simply make beaches wider. It redraws the planet. Land appears where now there is only water. Rivers extend far beyond modern shores. Islands become connected to continents. Entire ecosystems emerge on what we now call the ocean floor. Between Britain and mainland Europe, there was once no North Sea in the way we know it today. Britain was connected to Europe by a vast lowland world of rivers, marshes, forests, and open grassland. Today, archaeologists call this lost region Doggerland. But to the people who lived there, it was not lost land. It was home. They hunted there. They walked beside its rivers. They knew where animals crossed, where water gathered, where useful plants grew. Children were born there. Stories were told there. Fires burned there. And then, generation after generation, the sea came in. Not in one instant. Not like a movie disaster. Slowly, relentlessly. A little more each lifetime. Places that grandparents remembered as dry land became marsh. Places where people once camped became shoreline. Then shallow water. Then sea. Now pieces of that world occasionally return to us in strange ways. Animal bones, stone tools, fragments from the seabed pulled up by fishing nets. They are not just archaeological finds. They are messages from a drowned world. And Doggerland was not alone. The Persian Gulf was once largely dry land, a broad valley shaped by rivers and surrounded by exposed continental shelf. People could have lived there for thousands of years before rising seas covered it. Far to the north, Siberia and Alaska were connected by Beringia, the Bering Land Bridge. But calling it a bridge makes it sound too small. It was not a narrow path. It was a huge cold landscape with its own animals, plants, and open routes across the north. This was one of the great corridors through which humans likely entered the Americas. Today, that route lies under the Bering Sea. In Southeast Asia, the map was even more different. Islands that now look separated by water were once parts of a much larger landmass. Sumatra, Java and Borneo were connected to mainland Asia in a region called Sunderland. It was not just a few extra beaches, it was a tropical world larger than many modern countries, filled with forests, rivers, animals, and human movement. To the southeast, Australia and New Guinea were joined together as one greater continent known as Sahul. But even when sea levels were lower, there was still water between Sunderland and Sahul. People had to cross it. That matters. Because the ancestors of Aboriginal Australians did not simply wander into Australia by accident. They crossed open water. They must have used watercraft. They must have understood that land existed beyond the horizon, or at least believed strongly enough to risk the journey. This was not primitive behaviour. This was planning. Navigation, courage, imagination, ancient humans were not just walking animals, they were explorers. The world's coastlines were shifting targets. The Red Sea was narrower in some places, Sri Lanka was connected to India, Taiwan was connected to mainland Asia. Areas that are now seabed were once hunting grounds, migration routes, and homes, and this creates a strange thought. Many of the places where ancient people lived are now underwater. Their camps are gone. Their paths are gone. Their rivers are gone. The hills they named, the valleys they remembered, the places they warned children about. The places where someone died. The places where someone first saw the sea, all of it, may now be beneath waves. The modern map hides most of the human past. It is possible that some of humanity's oldest flood stories carry echoes of these real events. Across cultures, there are stories of rising waters, drowned lands, and worlds swallowed by the sea. Some researchers have suggested that at least a few of these stories may preserve distant memories of real coastline flooding. That is difficult to prove. Stories change, names disappear, myths grow. But the physical event behind the idea is real. The seas did rise, lands did vanish, people did move, and perhaps, long after the exact places were forgotten, the emotional memory remained. Once, the world we knew was taken by water. Now look upward. The night sky ancient humans saw was technically the same sky we see today. The stars were not arranged for them in some magical prehistoric pattern, but their experience of the sky was completely different. Because their nights were truly dark. No city glow, no street lights, no headlights, no satellites moving in neat artificial lines, no distant orange haze on the horizon, no electric world bleeding into the darkness. For ancient humans, night was not dim, it was deep. When the sun disappeared, the sky opened. The Milky Way was not a faint strip that you might notice if you drive far enough from a city. It was a massive glowing river across the heavens, bright enough to feel like part of the landscape. Dark lanes, star clouds, bright clusters, all visible to the naked eye. The sky had texture. It had depth. It looked alive. Planets stood out because they moved differently from the background stars. The moon controlled light, shadow, animal behaviour, and human movement. Meteor showers, comets, eclipses, and auroras would have been unforgettable events. But the sky was not only beautiful, it was useful. For people who moved through landscapes without maps, clocks, or written calendars, the sky was a survival tool. The stars helped with direction. The moon helped track time. Seasonal star patterns could signal when animals migrated, when rains might come, when plants would ripen, when it was time to move. The Pleiades, a small cluster of bright stars, appears in the traditions of cultures across the world. That is not random. It rises and sets at meaningful times of year, making it a natural calendar visible to anyone who paid attention. And ancient humans paid attention. They had to. Their world rewarded observation. If you noticed the sky, the wind, the birds, the insects, the smell of rain, The silence before a predator, you survived longer. Knowledge was not separate from life. Knowledge was life. Then there were the animals. This may be the hardest part of the ancient world for modern people to truly imagine. We live on a planet after the giants. Ancient humans did not. They shared Earth with an extraordinary abundance of large animals. The word often used is megafauna, big animals, many of them far larger than their modern relatives. In Africa, where humans evolved, large animals had lived alongside human ancestors for millions of years. Because of that long relationship, many African species had time to adapt to human presence. Even so, ancient Africa was richer in large animal diversity than the Africa we know now. There were multiple kinds of elephants and rhinoceroses, giant buffalo with enormous horns, huge predators, large grazing animals in numbers that would make many modern landscapes feel empty by comparison. In Europe and Asia, the scene was even more dramatic. Woolly mammoths moved across cold grasslands. Their bodies were massive, their tusks curved like pale weapons, their presence impossible to ignore. Woolly rhinoceroses grazed in frozen environments. Cave lions hunted across open land. Cave hyenas competed with humans for meat and shelter. Giant deer carried antlers so wide they seem almost impossible. Cave bears used the same caves that humans wanted for protection. Imagine being a small human group entering a cave and realizing something enormous might already be inside. Imagine finding a carcass and knowing you are not the only creature interested in it. Imagine watching mammoths cross the horizon while lions watch them too. This was not a peaceful nature documentary. It was a competitive world, a dangerous world, a world where humans were intelligent but not physically dominant. When Homo sapiens entered Europe around 45,000 years ago, they were not stepping into an empty wilderness. They were entering a continent ruled by giants. The cave paintings of places like Lascaux, Chauvet and Altamira make more sense when we remember this. Those animals on the walls were not fantasies. They were familiar presences. They were food, danger, beauty, mystery and power. People painted what mattered. And animals mattered more than almost anything. In the Americas, when humans arrived, the animal world was astonishing. Mammoths and mastodons lived there. Giant ground sloths the size of small elephants moved through forests and plains. Glyptodonts, armoured relatives of armadillos, looked almost like living tanks. Short-faced bears, American lions, saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, native horses, camels, and many other large animals filled the landscape. Then, in a relatively short time, much of that world disappeared. The exact causes are still debated. Climate change played a role. Human hunting may have played a role. Habitat changes mattered. Most likely several pressures combined. But the result is undeniable. The Earth lost many of its giants, and modern humans were born into the silence after that loss. We are so used to their absence that we rarely feel it. But our ancestors lived before the absence. They saw the giants. We see their bones. The plants and landscapes were different too. The Sahara is one of the clearest examples. Today it seems permanent. Endless sand, stone, heat and emptiness. But in the past, the Sahara was not always desert. During the Green Sahara period, roughly 11,000 to 5,000 years ago, North Africa received much more rainfall. Lakes spread across the region, rivers flowed, grasslands expanded. Animals lived there that now belong much farther south: hippos, crocodiles, elephants, cattle. Humans lived there too. They fished in lakes that no longer exist. They herded animals. They made rock art showing swimmers, cattle, and wildlife in places that are now dry and harsh. The Sahara was not always a barrier. For a time it was a homeland. Then the climate changed again. Rainfall declined, lakes shrank, rivers vanished, grasslands retreated. People had to move. Some likely moved toward the Nile Valley, where water remained reliable. In that sense, climate did not simply change scenery. It pushed human history in new directions. A drying Sahara may have helped concentrate populations in places where complex societies later emerged. The Amazon gives us a different kind of lesson. To modern eyes, it often looks like untouched wilderness, but more and more evidence suggests that many parts of the Amazon were shaped by human activity long before European contact. Fertile dark soils known as terra preta appear to have formed through long-term human management. Earthworks hidden beneath forest cover show organised modification of the landscape. Some forests may contain unusually high concentrations of useful tree species because people encouraged them over generations. What looks wild today may partly be a garden whose gardeners are gone. This changes how we think about nature. Sometimes wilderness is not land untouched by humans. Sometimes it is land where human history has been erased. Rivers were another major difference. In ancient worlds, rivers were not just scenery. They were roads, food sources, water sources, boundaries, meeting places, and memory lines. People followed them because life gathered around them. But many prehistoric rivers no longer exist in the same way. Some are drowned beneath the sea. Some became dry valleys. Some changed course. Some were fed by glaciers that later disappeared. The Sahara once held river systems that are now only ghost channels in the desert. Arabia had wetter corridors at certain times. Doggerland had rivers flowing across land that is now seabed. Europe's rivers connected through landscapes that no longer exist. If we could see the ancient world from above, the human map would not match ours. Their highways were different. Their coastlines were different. Their water sources were different. Their world made sense according to patterns that the modern map has erased, and climate itself was not stable. The Pleistocene was a time of repeated climate shifts. Ice advanced and retreated. Forests spread and withdrew. Grasslands opened and closed. Sea levels rose and fell. Rainfall patterns changed. For some human groups, the world remembered by grandparents may have been noticeably different from the world experienced by children. Imagine learning that a river once flowed year-round, but now runs dry. Imagine hunting grounds becoming forest. Imagine forests becoming open grassland. Imagine the shoreline creeping closer each generation. Ancient humans did not live against a stable background. They lived inside a changing system. Some scientists argue that this instability helped shape human intelligence. A world that changes quickly rewards flexibility. It rewards memory, communication, planning, experimentation, and teaching. Groups that could adapt survived. Groups that could not adapt disappeared. In that sense, the human mind may have been sharpened by uncertainty. Our ability to imagine the future, prepare for danger, change strategies, and pass knowledge to the next generation may have been forged by a planet that refused to stay still. There is something powerful about that. The same mind you are using right now to understand this sentence, to picture ancient landscapes, to imagine people who lived before history may be the result of countless generations trying to survive ice, drought, flood, hunger, migration, and change. Human thought was shaped by weather, water, animals, and time. There is one more part of the ancient world we almost never talk about. Sound. Before engines, machines, electricity, aircraft, highways, factories, and cities, the world sounded completely different. There was no constant mechanical background hum, no traffic in the distance, no power lines, no motors, no artificial noise filling the empty spaces. The ancient soundscape was open. Wind through grass, water over stone, insects, birds, animal calls, thunder, fire, footsteps, breath, silence, and silence itself had meaning. A sudden silence in the forest could warn of a predator. Bird calls could reveal movement. The sound of hooves or breaking branches could tell you what kind of animal was nearby, how far away it was, and whether it was coming closer. Ancient humans listened in a way most of us no longer do. They read the world through sound. To them, a landscape was not quiet. It was speaking. And survival depended on understanding its language. But perhaps the most important difference is this. Ancient humans did not know they were ancient. They did not know they were living in prehistory. They did not know mammoths would vanish. They did not know the seas would rise. They did not know that future humans would dig up their tools, study their bones, and wonder what their lives felt like. They lived inside their present, just as we live inside ours. They woke up hungry. They watched weather. They feared predators. They cared for children. They buried their dead. They remembered places. They told stories. They looked at the sky, and they left behind signs that feel deeply human. Paintings on cave walls, handprints pressed in pigment, carved figures, burials, tools made with care. Objects that suggest memory, belief, beauty, and identity. A handprint on a cave wall may be one of the most direct messages ever left by a human being. It says, "I was here. This was my hand. I existed." Across tens of thousands of years, that message still reaches us. Ancient humans stood under a brighter sky, beside different rivers, among vanished animals, on coastlines that no longer exist. They watched a world more wild, more dangerous, more alive, and more unstable than the one we know. And they felt wonder. Not a primitive version of wonder. Human wonder. The tragedy is not that they were unlike us. The tragedy is that they were so much like us, but the world they knew is gone. We can study it. We can map it. We can reconstruct it from bones, stones, sediments, and stories. But we cannot stand where they stood. Because many of those places are underwater. Many of those animals are extinct. Many of those rivers are dry, and much of that sky has been hidden behind our own light. The Earth ancient humans saw was not just an earlier version of our planet. It was a vanished Earth. And for a brief moment in time, our ancestors were there to witness it.